Good morning to all of our listeners. Welcome. Welcome to Tech Central. This is our Tech Central webinar, and we're very, very pleased to be in this fantastic studio. This is the IBM studio in downtown Johannesburg, Braamfontein. Hiren is the associate partner for hybrid cloud here for all cloud services for IBM South Africa. Jaco Sadie is the go-to-market cloud specialist and lead, and we really have a lot to listen to today. There's been some research that's been done, which we very much look forward to hearing about, and that which will be shared with our listeners after today's webinar. And we also have to unpack and understand a little bit more about this adoption that's happening as fast as it is in our current climate. As much as 59% of the organizations that were surveyed acknowledged the fact that they've accelerated their adoption of cloud. Some suggestions say that as much as 6 years worth of potential growth and adoption and transformation to cloud have been accelerated as a result of this pandemic. We're not here to listen to me. I hand it over to you guys.
Thank you very much. And again, a hearty welcome to the audience. As James has said, this is our studio, a wonderful place. We bring our clients here, we do our design thinking, we do our co-creation. Now that the pandemic is kind of over, we are now fortunate to be together, and we see a lot of our clients doing that as well. So I do welcome you into our IBM studio. As James has said, cloud, digital transformation, I think those are the two big topics that people are talking about. The report that I'll take you through during today's session is around cloud's next leap. And in there we'll talk about, where are companies going to? We know that over the last 4 to 5 years, people have been talking about digital transformation. We know that people have not really done a lot in terms of digital transformation, but I'll try to unpack that a little bit more in terms of what our South African executives are saying, and that is what the research has now been conducted. So it was looking at global executives, and 179 of those global executives were South African. So I want to make it really real for us as South Africa to understand what is South Africa saying from a cloud and from a digital transformation perspective. Just a little bit about the survey. So it was done by the IBM Institute of Business Value. And if you haven't seen it, go to the IBV website on ibm.com, and there's a whole list of reports that are available on there. We did it in conjunction with the Oxford Economics company, and there were various roles from CEOs to CIOs to CTOs, COOs, CFOs that were interviewed, and they provided their perspective on where are they going in terms of the journey towards the digital transformation. I think what's important is that the strength of these companies amount to a mean level of about $7 billion. So these are the guys that are really leading the path in terms of IT spending and transformation. There are a couple of questions that the IBV team sought to answer during the survey. The one is, are enterprises accelerating their digital transformation agendas along with their adoption of cloud? The other is, are those investments returning the business value enterprises expected? And the third is, what is the current state of cloud-powered digital transformation? So those are three broad strokes in terms of what was covered. So I'd like to kind of have a little discussion about where are companies locally going. And Jaco, in your view, you were the ex-Prime Media CIO. Can you talk about where did Prime Media go, and what do you believe would their next steps be?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. So Prime Media Broadcasting was a predominantly broadcasting radio organization. I think everybody knows Prime Media Broadcasting really well with 94.7, EWN, Eyewitness News. So this journey for broadcasting started in 2010. And what had happened was the organization had very quickly realized they had to shift from a traditional broadcasting organization to a digital content provider. And with that came the realization that cloud was essential in that. So what I did there was embark on a cloud journey with Prime Media Broadcasting, and we then moved a lot of platforms and services into the public cloud. At the time, It was a single cloud provider that we moved to. So the transformation inside the business, the cloud itself actually allowed the business or gave the business that platform to be more agile and to create these new digital platforms and content.
And Jaco, perhaps just to expand a little bit about that, so cloud is great, and we will cover a little bit later, but in Primedia's world, where does data fit into their journey?
So data inside the Primedia organization is obviously extremely important. And it was really important to get data to move to an agile platform, a platform where we had unlimited capacity, we didn't have any of the constraints that we were used to. So getting that data into that platform was really important, but also starting to get the benefits of data inside the cloud platform where you couple AI and machine learning to those data sets. That was also extremely important because the data inside the organization was now being shared across multiple brands and not just being siloed.
Okay.
It sounds like that a lot of what you're doing is mitigating risk, something that is quite often a byproduct or not necessarily an afterthought, but sometimes not the forefront of why someone chooses to do something. What are some of the conversations you've been having with some of your existing clients, and what is perhaps some of the hypotheses you are hoping to achieve by conducting some research and therefore encourage adoption with mitigation right up there at the forefront of their consideration?
Mm-hmm. So again, the research was really looking at, from a hypothesis perspective, where are people channeling their IT spend? Is it only the cloud, or are they channeling their spend in other areas? What was very key for us is comparing what the spend was pre-pandemic and what the spend now is, now that we are getting out of the pandemic. And what are companies really looking at from a prioritization perspective in their technology landscape? So, in terms of the hypotheses, in fact, there were surprises in the hypotheses from a report perspective when we looked at the South African results. And, when we looked at it, and, we'll get into it just now in terms of the surprises and what was expected, but there were some surprises when we looked at, what we had answered from a South African perspective versus what the global teams had answered. So I think we'll get into a little bit of detail when we look at the report itself. So I want to park that question.
Okay.
Now. Yeah.
Might this be a nice opportunity for us to engage the audience and for them to participate in a prepared poll that we have? Because a lot of what is asked in typical survey and understanding of a situation is the responses are sometimes based on assumption. This research might dispel some of that assumption. What we'd love to do is engage the audience, and what we're going to do is we're going to make a poll live, and it's going to appear on your screens now. Please participate in that poll by selecting one of the three answers. Could you talk us through this, and maybe this will lead us very much into where the research went, please?
Yeah, so, I think, as I said, there was a surprise. So if you look at the poll, if you can apply your mind and try to think about what was that surprise, what did not support the hypotheses. So I've put a couple of options in the poll. The one is enterprises are increasing levels of IT spending, especially based on the many reports that enterprises have been doubling down on digital investments during the pandemic. The second one is hybrid cloud or multi-cloud won and has become the dominant architecture for enterprise cloud estates. And the third is cultural openness to both new ways of working and growth mindsets is yielding positive outcomes and is a marker of high performance. So those are the three options. If you could make your selection, we won't reveal what the right answer is at the moment. We'll show the results of the poll, but there will be a great reveal shortly in terms of what the survey had to say. From a research perspective, as I said, 4 to 5 years, people were starting to talk about cloud, talk about digital transformation. We now want to understand what are companies now saying from a technology perspective. So, you've got cloud, and cloud is actually a very small piece of the puzzle. We wanted to understand what are executives thinking about in terms of the next step. And that's why we call it the cloud next leap. where to from here is really where we want to get to. And a lot of that will be uncovered. I don't want to steal the thunder, I guess, right now. But you will start seeing, the path that companies would need to follow in terms of moving towards that full transformation journey.
So organizations have taken this time to regroup, collaborate on their ideas, re-strategize, and perhaps cloud is a topic that they understand they're on a journey that has been mapped out. But is that journey a clear journey? Is it perhaps a journey that the definition of A to B has now evolved?
Yeah. And that is not clear.
Okay.
And that's why, so if you look at pre-pandemic, things were moving as they were. You had people going into banks to do their, financials.
Sure.
You had companies going into stores, purchasing, regularly. Then the pandemic hit.
Mm.
And suddenly companies had to figure out, what do I do now? And the easy answer was cloud. Okay, so take everything that you've got in your stores and put it into the cloud. Okay, and that worked to a certain extent for lots of companies. Mm. But now that you're on the cloud, is it complete? Do you now need to think about other things? You need to start thinking about the experience that you want your clients to have on the cloud platform. And you have to look at different levels. You have to start analyzing a lot more data to appeal to your customer. So that's the intent of the research, to figure out what that journey looks like.
And you're not the first person that's been using this analogy, but customer centricity. It's so important to understand what that customer needs and what the customer's after. And that need has evolved. And it's always evolving. And perhaps this is why a lot of the interest that we're going to get in the survey is as a result of that evolution of the mindset and the change in behavior and the use of the customers and the customer's needs.
Exactly. Can we look at the number of people that had participated in the survey? Can we look at some numbers? So the most was on the second hybrid cloud, multi-cloud one, and has become the dominant architecture. So the audience is not, they are saying this did not support the hypotheses, right? Okay, interesting. Okay, good.
Thank you.
So I think let's get into a couple of slides. I don't really like going into slides, but I think for the purposes of this report, it's important that we show you what some of the key takeaways were as part of the report. So the first one was untapped potential remains, right? Okay, 77% of the audience said untapped potential remains. Okay, so I think that's the first thing. What this means and what we've been talking about is that you've got cloud, there's so much more that's untapped. What else can we do to get into the digital transformation? So there's many more layers that you need to, let's say, unpeel to get to that untapped potential. So that's really where our audience, our respondents have told us that they need to get to. I think, you use the concept of art of the possible. So now that has been, asked very specifically by the executives. What is the art of the possible? How do we get into this untapped potentials that do exist? I think the next area of hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, which comes out on top. And interestingly, that is something that the audience had mentioned that did not support the hypotheses. But I'd like to ask Yaku for his comment.
Sure.
What do you think companies are saying about hybrid multi-cloud?
So I just want to bring it back to the conversation I had earlier where when we were first adopters of cloud, we looked at a single cloud. And I think what executives are realizing now is that single cloud is not the complete journey just for the cloud portion of this. So there is much deeper analysis that's being done currently on the application estate, the data estate, and organizations are realizing that they need to leverage multiple cloud providers. And also, there may also be some legacy that cannot be moved to cloud. So this is now a new world of multi-hybrid cloud where you have some elements inside your own private cloud, but you also then spread assets across multiple other cloud providers.
Again, spreading that risk.
Absolutely.
And what was quite interesting in terms of the results was company or corporates have told us that they are on up to 9 different cloud providers. So, as you said rightfully, Yaku, gone are the days you've got one cloud, you put everything into one cloud. With the extent that you now have cloud locally in South Africa, the likes of AWS, the likes of Azure are, in country, and I believe a lot more cloud providers will come into country. And I think again, a lot of companies are talking about the POPI Act, but what we understand the POPI Act to say is that as long as the cloud that hosts your data is the same or better than what the regulation stipulates, you should be safe to, host your data in that cloud provider. So, I think everyone uses the likes of Google, everyone uses the likes of Microsoft Outlook that sits on Azure. So I was absolutely not surprised that companies have said they are in up to 9 different cloud providers. Yeah. So if we go back to the 3 key takeaways, so the third one was the soft stuff matters, right? So this talks about culture. It talks about how does your company engage on a people level. So you have to ensure when you go out and do a transformation through cloud and through digital, you do it on an enterprise level. You have to also ensure that all different stakeholders are involved in that journey. So when we talk of all stakeholders, it's, when you talk about cloud and transformation, it's not something that IT drives, right? It's something that from the people that do development to the people that do any kind of call center type of activities to your executives, and executives from CFOs to your CEOs to your CTOs, chief digital officers, head of business, all of them have to be engaged. So you have to make sure that culture is instilled in the organization from the top to the bottom. And the executives that were surveyed, they all agreed, and that was one of the key takeaways from the survey.
And they talked about people, but they also talk about the environment.
Exactly. So environment is important. I mean, you can instill some culture in people, but if there's no collaboration across different teams, it doesn't really give you a good environment to work in, right? So your environment is, let's say no-brainer. We expect that when you look at your technology, when you look at culture, you have to make sure your environment is created in a way that bodes well for the organization to move towards that transformation journey. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A very interesting segue into another slide, because I think this journey is something that we understand from a platform perspective, we understand from a technology perspective, and we're all looking to unpack certain aspects of it. But what are some of the leadership decisions that need to be made? I mean, the listeners on this call might be saying, I'm no subject matter expert at cloud. And I hope the research will also elaborate on this somewhat, but where do I start?
So where do you start is basically ensuring, again, you have a clear strategy, right? So don't get into a cloud journey if you don't really understand what that end goal is, right? So I think a lot of the companies that we've engaged with, well, not a lot, but many are stalled. So I think just make sure, to the audience that you have all of your stakeholders on board. You have a clear way in which you will get into your cloud journey, where you will get into your transformation journey. You understand what the consequences are from a financial perspective, from a technology perspective, from a business perspective, and more importantly, from a customer perspective. So think about the journey in the eyes of a customer as well, right? So I think a lot of the times we are bogged down in terms of IT, in terms of technology, in terms of just generating additional revenue or lowering cost. But we need to think about what is the customer experience at the end, right? So I think all of that needs to come in and be created as a clear strategy in adoption. So what I would like to look at now is the, as I called it, the great reveal. So in the great reveal, what we will uncover now is what were those surprises that did not really match our hypotheses. So the ticks are really the ones that we expected. It's the normal stuff of culture, of cybersecurity, and okay, I might have given it away. Hybrid cloud, multi-cloud was not one of the surprises. So the one big thing that we realized is that pre-pandemic spend, so if you look at the IT spend versus post-pandemic spend, we expected post-pandemic spend to have increased. And with the South African survey, we actually saw it remained unchanged. So, I think we need to dig a little bit deeper into why that was the case. And, we need to, perhaps understand a little bit more around what's happened in terms of the post-pandemic spend in the South African climate. So I think with that, Yaku, perhaps I'd like you to, give us your perspective. What do you think has happened in this, in South Africa in particular?
Sure. So we are saying that the global spend has increased, but South Africa has not, and we are lagging behind. So there are a couple of things that I think can be attributed to this in South Africa specifically. I think what's happened is that traditional spending, the budget shifted from business as usual to keeping the lights on. That could be one thing. The other thing is that the budget cycles have not really caught up yet with where the business is going. And maybe the third one is that businesses have used the opportunity to reinvest the cost savings back into the business processes and not back into IT.
Okay. And if we have a look at the next slide, what we've seen is that the IT spend pre-pandemic was at around 3.6%. And the IT spend now is in that region. Now, I think, when we compare it to the global survey, and the reason that it didn't match our hypotheses is that globally, companies are spending in the region of about 3.9% to 4%. And that compared to the 3.6% that was pre-pandemic, obviously shows that global companies are looking at changing their IT landscape, changing the way that they operate in the future, making conscious decisions to invest in IT. I think, if you think about it, a lot of companies may have channeled money into other more important areas. IT sometimes doesn't necessarily get the funding that they need, right? So what we've seen anyway is that globally, IT has now been recognized as very important, because if you are in a pandemic in the future, IT is what will have to carry you from a digital perspective. So that's the reason that we see that growth in IT spend.
So thank you very much for explaining that, Hiren.
Right.
And what we really, really want to get into is understanding how the audience here, as leaders in the organizations, can shift their thought process and perhaps allocate more of that spend. I think the number you said was 3.9% of global spend in organization is going towards cloud. Am I right?
Towards IT spend, cloud.
IT spend complete.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Of which cloud is yet another small portion.
Exactly.
So allocating that proportionate amount of cloud should perhaps be commensurate with the need.
Absolutely. Exactly.
Yeah.
So again, I think in terms of the survey results, what we saw is 30% of companies have indicated that they are almost done with their the cloud journey, right? Whereas 27% have informed us that they've actually stalled. So going back to what I mentioned earlier, there are a number of companies that have, let's say, successfully gone through the journey, but 27% is a large number, and we can see that companies are, I guess, struggling a bit in terms of their journey to the cloud. And there are, I think, a bit, many reasons for that. What we are finding is that there are some companies are in a cloud version 1, version 2, version 3, and version 4 journey. And normally what we see is cloud version 1 are the companies that have decided I'm going to the cloud now, and this was a couple of years ago, and they are well into that journey. But a lot of those companies are really now asking themselves, what next? So this report is actually quite timely because it does help understand what next, right? many other companies in terms of where, they may be in a cloud version 2, 3, or 4, they haven't quite gotten to that point where they are, fully on the cloud yet. And the reason that this is important is that if you are not, you need to get on board one of these journeys. And, we'll cover that in a little bit more detail later on, but I'll give you an indication of how you can do that and what you can do to get into the right, let's say, journey that makes sense for you. Yeah.
Thanks, Aaron. I have an analogy, and I think I love journey and adventure. But organizations are spending a lot of time planning and mapping out what these may look like. They look at their user journeys. But I definitely see IBM as an ideal guide. You understand how to sort of map what that journey might look like from the beginning.
Correct.
Start that preparation, start your packing, make sure you've got the right kit. Exactly. And we talk about platform and that journey and the go-to market.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. This is fascinating. We look forward to the next slide, please.
Yeah, and I think in the next slide, I'd like to ask Yaku to just give us a view on how do we do this, right?
Sure. So I think one of the questions is, what is the potential revenue impact of cloud and how do you maximize that? So going back to earlier conversations, what I did say was it is foundational for cloud to be the first portion of that, but that only unlocks 10% of that future potential revenue growth. So where are the other things that need to be unlocked? What else needs to be done? And that talks to what you said earlier about what's next. When we add the advanced features of data capabilities to that stack, we add another 9% to that 10% of potential future revenue growth. And what else is there that we can add to that? We can add advanced technologies like AI, IoT. Those will add another 18%. We can also add even more. We can add skills, we can add process to that. That will unlock even more. That'll add another 36% to that initial 10% that we talked about. And finally, for the 27% that's remaining, that talks to culture, that talks to platforms, that talks to open innovation within the organization. So you can see that these are really the levers that are not directly related to cloud, but that organizations need to be thinking about in terms of what to do next to unlock that future potential revenue growth.
And that helps with the planning and the preparation and the expectation of what is likely to come. Where do you start that engagement with a customer? At any point in the journey?
So the cloud portion of this, the platform, like I said, is where you really start this journey. That's foundational. You have to start there. But in parallel with that is the rest of the business transformation. So in order for businesses to take advantage of this new cloud model and all the advantages that cloud can bring, they have to, in parallel with their cloud journey, think about these other things that I've now mentioned.
Okay. Thank you. And I think if someone was to begin their journey or already be at, let's say you mentioned version 1 of their journey, they know to come to you and describe where they're at, and you will hold their hands through the process.
Absolutely.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
So, as you would see, and this was phenomenal when I looked at the numbers, 27% is attributable to an open organization. So when we talk about an open organization, we talk about culture, we talk about platform, and we talk about ecosystems.
Yeah.
So what we are finding in a lot of our customers is that they are very focused on an ecosystems business. So, it's a good buzzword. What does it actually mean?
Yeah.
So ecosystems really mean that, I operate as a unit, but I also am dependent on a number of other companies around me to ensure that I'm successful. So it's not just about me, it's also about how do I work with my partners to ensure we let's say, change the game, right? So we've seen financial companies working on tech, and fintech is the big buzzword. Mm-hmm. So, that's the one thing. We look at telco companies getting into finance. So when you talk of ecosystems, we talk about the broader strokes. We talk about, not just being in your swim lane, working with other companies out there, because gone are the days where you can only focus on one thing. You, as an ecosystem, you work with partners to make sure that, and and I always think about it as, you always think about it from a customer's perspective. A customer wants to go into your portal and they want to sit back and they want to be able to buy insurance, buy, a cell phone contract or data, buy groceries, and many companies we engage with want to get to that type of environment. So when I look at platform and I look at ecosystem, the two go hand in hand. So companies want to get into a platform business. Platform businesses means, again, that take the data that you've got under, your IT infrastructure and try to make it to make sense to your clients, so that they are able to change certain buying behaviors through a platform business. So, I think that's quite important. And then also, if you look at this again, the organizational enablers. So what's listed in here are skills, process, cybersecurity. That's a whopping 36%.
Yeah.
36% to get to that 100% of potential revenue impact. That's certainly a big number. So, back to the conversation we had, the environment, the skills that you need to operate, a lot of companies are not really paying attention to that. So, I think that's quite an important part in terms of the journey. If you don't have the skills, within your organization, if you are not secure, we heard of ransomware attacks, we've heard of all of these cybersecurity issues globally. If you are not secure, your revenue is directly impacted. Okay, so, the study goes into all of that level. The enablers that we've got in terms of technologies, AI, IoT, robotic process automation. If you unpack all of that, wow, if you just look at a supply chain process, we are talking about how to get the supply chain process to be an intelligent workflow. And what that means is it looks at a process from a machine language lens, from a robotic process lens, and from a cloud lens, to make sure that it's not just a robotic process, it's an intelligent process. So that again drives an additional 18%. And this is actually one of my favorite slides. So this, I guess I'm revealing I'm a bit of a geek in terms of slides and IT. So when you look at this, and we covered quite a bit of it already, our view is that in an organization, you do have to always talk about the customer's constituents. And the constituents are made up of employees, partners, all different players in the journey. So when you talk of partners, employees, and customers, you have to bring them all together and understand their experience. Now, something we call the intelligent enterprise, which kind of talks to a bit about what we just talked about in the previous slide. The intelligent enterprise brings all of this together, and there's a name that we call it as IBM. It's an inclusive human technology partnership. So when we talk about human and technology, we have to make sure it's inclusive to get to an intelligent enterprise. And when we do that, we look at technology, and you would see in the slide, hybrid cloud is at the top. So with hybrid cloud, with the experience of all our different constituents in a company, we make sure that it's all inclusive in that whole journey that we want to get into the intelligent enterprise. And I think on the left of your screen, you would also see that data. So there's a whole data science that we've also adopted. What we find is that lots of companies are accelerating their data to the cloud. And when you do that, you almost accelerate your transformation, because you are now leaving behind the old architectures that you would have created for your data, where it was slow and, let's say, clumsy. We want to make data available on the cloud to anybody, anywhere. And that's why, what we believe, by creating this data fabric on the cloud and completing the picture with the cloud and that experience, we are able to get you into that intelligent enterprise, which is, that big next step that you should be taking.
Thanks, Aaron. What might that big next step be?
So again, and if I show you an example of a customer of ours, Unilever. Now, Unilever basically is one of our global customers, and in there we've gone in and we've evaluated their cloud, we've evaluated their business processes. In there, we've taken their lead to cash business process.
Sure.
We've taken that end to end, and we've tried to ensure we optimize various components of the whole lead to cash. Now, most companies, would know what a lead to cash means, but that kind of drives your business, right? So you get a customer wanting something, and you want to sell it to them, and eventually you get your revenue out of that transaction. So as part of that process, we've looked at that intelligent enterprise. We've been able to give them certain benefits, and some of those benefits are on there. Some things like unapplied cash, which was reduced from 7% to 0.01%. We looked at turnaround time reduced from 9 days to 3 days. Overdue debt reduction, we reduced by 94%. So all of that has a massive impact into revenue, into the business. So we don't just, again, look at cloud as a technology platform. We look at the business processes on top. And Unilever is a great example where we've applied it, and they've already started getting that benefit from business processes on the cloud that they can start getting benefit from.
Database decision making is done as a result of measurement. So
Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly. I think with that, what we've seen, and we go back to the cloud version 1, 2, 3, and 4, I would like to leave with certain takeaways, to the audience, right? For those that are stalled, it's not the end of the world. You need to get to a position where you understand where you are in your journey, and you need to understand which cloud journey, whether it's version 1, 2, 3, or 4, that you need to start adopting. So, think about, we call it a fishbowl environment. So we say, let's build a fishbowl environment. Now, fishbowl is making sure, everybody knows exactly what's going on. There's clarity, there's transparency, and you are able to clearly articulate where you want to get to. You could potentially also adopt an industry cloud. So, IBM's got industry clouds. Some of our partners have industry clouds. That just accelerates your journey as well. So a lot of what you may have not thought about have already been adopted in that industry cloud. So as an example, financial services have an industry cloud. So, you may have stalled, or you may in your mind believe you are not, in the journey that you want to be in, but perhaps look at that industry cloud and perhaps adopt that to fast track your journey towards that transformation. Others want to perhaps start small, learn fast, but make a dent. So, we always say, and I think the setting is quite adept for that, because what we believe in a studio is apply a startup type mindset. Yeah. Go in with a plan to co-create. Bring everyone that you can into a discussion. Start talking about what are the various ideas, and do a minimal viable product, right? Do a small piece of work and fail. It's okay to fail. Fail fast. And once you've done that, you know what needs to be done next. Then you go into, as part of our design thinking, go into co-execute and cooperate. Where in your co-execution, we work with subject matter experts, and you execute on that minimal viable product, whatever is defined in that piece of work. We also say that take advantage of your existing assets. So, many companies out there have got lots of assets, some 30, 40, 50 years worth of data. Use that. Try to understand how that can be leveraged. Try to perhaps look at modernizing it and exposing it on the cloud so that you can move into that transformation that you are looking for. So, I'd like to leave you with that, as some takeaways. And that's what you will also see in the report, that these are the ways in which we believe that clients should adopt that transformation journey. And we go into a lot more detail in terms of what is cloud version 1, 2, 3, and 4, and how can you get into one of those journeys if you have not entered into those journeys as yet.
Thank you, Hiren. That's very, very interesting. I think you've nailed what a lot of our listeners are perhaps looking for in terms of an answer and where to go next. Jaco, anything more from your side?
The only other thing I also want to add to what Hiren said was check to see if your cloud strategy is not really, in effect, just a workload migration strategy. So cloud strategy starts with planning, and workload migration is part of that process. But there is so much more to it. So it is a journey. It is not something that happens overnight. And organizations also need to employ critical thinking when it comes to business process transformation that goes hand in hand with cloud platform transformation.
Thanks, Jaco. That was very, very clear. And I think a lot of what I've definitely been hearing today from both Hiren and Jaco is the importance of making subjective opinions. And subjective decisions based on opinion that may come from research, may come from subject matter experts like the two gentlemen either side of me, but also understanding that as leadership, we're often looking at what needs to happen within the business, and we're making a series of decisions based on objective outcomes. Those objective outcomes, not that they aren't at all important, they of course are, but is there an imperative there? Is there something you should perhaps be making a different decision that might lead you down a different path on a different journey, or remap that journey for you? And I think as leadership, we need to be assured that this new way of working, this new environment, you mentioned the soft skills count, they do actually matter. They matter in order to get you to the point where that hybrid multi-cloud is relevant. They get you to the point where you are able to unpack that potential that is perhaps untapped by your customer. And I think today's learnings from both you as subject matter experts and IBM as a leader in this field have been fascinating, because a lot of us aren't sure what next. And I asked that question, and you answered very well. Thank you, Hiren. What next is definitely more conversations with the likes of yourselves.
Yes.
It's engaging in the survey that we're going to share the results of. And it's actually bouncing ideas off each other as a community, as an industry, and getting to a point where cloud works for us and it works for our end user.
Yeah. I think that's perfectly said. I think for me, I think for the audience, don't just think cloud, and cloud is not the silver bullet, right? So cloud is one of the silver bullets, not the silver bullet. So I think about it as, how, and that's the purpose of the report. How do you make sure that you go into that journey, and that journey never stops, right? So you will always innovate. You will always change your landscape, either from an IT perspective or a business perspective. So that transformation would not stop, but you do need to start that journey now, right? I think my advice to everyone is, let's not wait for, and God forbid, another pandemic. Let's be ready. I know a lot of companies were scurrying around when this happened. Let's not be in that situation again. Read this report. It'll give you very good nuggets in terms of how you can take that journey. Let's engage. IBM is ready to engage with you. Let's look at how we can help you in that journey, because we certainly have seen that companies have struggled, and they may still struggle if they do not take the right next steps.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to all of you that were able to join today. And I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with our two experts, Hiren Bula, Jaco Sedi. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for letting us be in your magnificent studio today.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Thank you very much. That's it from James Erasmus here at Tech Central. We look forward to hosting you at our next webinar.